Welcome to We the People's News, real life news you can trust. We're going to tackle the issue of how honorable is John McCain, or was he a traitor to the American people? He sure seemed to like to bash his own. Thank you for tuning in.
Mr. President, if there is objection, and I note the senator from Kentucky on the floor, I will say before I read this, if there is objection, you are achieving the objectives of Vladimir Putin. You're achieving the objectives of trying to dismember this small country that has already been the subject of attempted coup. I have no idea why anyone would object to this, except that I will say, if they object, they are now carrying out the desires and ambitions of Vladimir Putin, and I do not say that lightly. So, Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that at a time to be determined by the Majority Leader in consultation with the Democratic Leader, the Senate proceed to executive session to consider calendar number 1, Montenegro Treaty Document 11-114-12, that the treaty be considered as having advanced through the various parliamentary stages up to and including the presentation of the resolution of ratification, that any committee declarations be agreed to as applicable, that there be no amendments in order to the treaty or the resolution of ratification, that there be 2 hours for debate, equally divided in the usual form. Upon the use of yielding back of time, the Senate proceed to vote on the resolution, that any statements be printed in the record as if read, that if the resolution of ratification is agreed to, the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table, that the President be immediately notified of the Senate's action, that if the resolution is not agreed to, the treaty will be returned to the calendar, and that there be no motions or point of order in order, then a motion to reconsider, and then the Senate then resume legislative session.
Mr. President? Senator from Kentucky.
I object.
Objection is heard.
Mr. President, I note the senator from Kentucky leaving the floor without justification or any rationale for the action that he has just taken. That is really remarkable, that a senator blocking a treaty that is supported by the overwhelming number, perhaps 98 at least, of his colleagues, would come to the floor and object and walk away. And walk away. The only conclusion you can draw when he walks away is he has no argument to be made. He has no justification for his objection to having a small nation be part of NATO that is under assault from the Russians. So I repeat again, the senator from Kentucky is now working for Vladimir Putin. I yield the floor.
The Honorable John McCain calls another senator a Russian agent on the Senate floor. How honorable is that? And look who he was caught with in Syria. Is he an Islam agent? Makes you wonder, doesn't it? All this hoopla about a traitor.
So I know that you are a member of the Foreign Relations Committee. The question is, what do you think is the top priority in terms of foreign affairs for the United States?
I think the top priority for the country, constitutionally, historically, and appropriately, is defense of the country. That's what we're supposed to do in Washington. That being said, Reagan's motto was peace through strength. It wasn't war through strength. There are some, sometimes in our party, who mistake war for defense. And if you don't believe in eternal and perpetual war, it doesn't mean you don't believe in a strong national defense. And this is an important distinction. There are some in our party who wanted to give arms to Gaddafi, and then a year later wanted to give money to rebels to overturn Gaddafi. There's a certain inconsistency. I'm very worried about getting involved in a new war in Syria. And people say, well, Assad is such a bad guy. He is. But on the other side, we have Al-Qaeda and now Nusra. And then they say there are some pro-Western people, and they say, oh, we're going to vet them. Well, apparently we've got a senator over there who had a picture taken with some kidnappers, so I don't know how good a job we're going to do vetting those who are going to get the arms. So there's 2 ironies you have to overcome if you want to get involved in the war in Syria. The first irony is you will be allied with Al-Qaeda. The second irony is most of the Christians are on the other side. So you may be arming Islamic rebels who may well be killing Christians. Does that make Assad a good person? No. I don't think there are any good people in this war. And there's some tragically innocent people who are going to be caught in the middle, but I just don't know that arming one side is going to make the tragedy any less. So I think we need to be careful and cautious.
Here is Rand Paul's response and his reasoning why we shouldn't have allowed the country into NATO.
Mr. President.
Senator from Kentucky.
President Trump said in his inaugural address that we've defended other nations' borders while refusing to defend our own. I think he was right. Today, the question is, will we add another commitment to defend yet another foreign country? For decades, NATO has been an organization where the U.S. disproportionately spends our blood and our treasure. The other NATO countries have largely hitched a ride on a U.S. train that subsidizes their defenses and allows them to direct their revenues to their own domestic concerns. In short, Uncle Sam is the Uncle Patsy for the rest of the world. The question today is, adding another country with less than 2,000 soldiers, is that adding them to NATO, will that be in our self-interest? Less than 2,000 soldiers, small country in a distant part of the world, will they make you sleep safer at night? The answer is an emphatic no. There is no national security interest that an alliance with Montenegro will advance. If we invite Montenegro into NATO, it will be a one-way street with the U.S. committing to defend yet another country and you, the taxpayer, being stuck with the bill. Even the advocates of Montenegro joining NATO admit as much. The Senate hearing on admitting Montenegro to NATO was really just a punching session about Russia. Not one word was said about allowing Montenegro into NATO or how it would advance our own national security. We were going to send a message to Russia. Even the citizens of Montenegro are divided on this. About half of them want to be in NATO, and the other half don't want to be in NATO. But it isn't really about them. It's about us. Is admitting Montenegro to NATO good for us? Our national security is our national security. Is Montenegro going to defend the United States? Are they of any importance to our national security? Or perhaps will they entangle us in local, historic, regional conflicts in the area? We must ask, is Montenegro an asset to the defense of the United States? That is the question at hand. The answer is a simple one. Admitting Montenegro to NATO will do nothing to advance our national security and will do everything to simply add another small country to the welfare wagon of NATO. Advocates for expanding NATO believe that unless the whole world joins NATO, Russia will conquer the world. But the truth is more nuanced. During the Cold War, the myth of Russian might was endlessly circulated here at home, and the effect was the production of endless munitions and ever-expanding debt. You're still paying the tab for that. The Cold War ended, and the Soviet Union failed, not because our military might overcame them, but because our economic system outlasted them. They were defeated. Capitalism defeated socialism. If there is one message that Americans should get, capitalism is stronger than socialism. We should not flirt with political leaders in our country promoting what caused the Soviet Union to fail. But now we are told we must fear Russia again, fear the Russian bear. But if you look closely, you will see that Russian aggression around the world, and particularly among the former Soviet satellites, is an attempt to mask a weak economy that runs the same risk of overextension that caused the Soviet empire to collapse. Russia is weak. Russia is weak because of corruption, oligarchy, human rights abuses. If Russia continues on this path, they may well encounter the same cataclysm that brought down the Soviet empire. Without question, Russia is an adversary, a country that ignores international norms, does not respect the territorial integrity of their neighbors, and yet someone must ask, is it in our national interest to insist that countries of the former Soviet Union be in NATO? Because the debate today is not just about Montenegro. The same cheerleaders for Montenegro being in NATO want Ukraine in NATO. They want Georgia in NATO.
This is about NATO expansion in general, and this is a chance to have a real debate. In Ukraine and Georgia, if both Ukraine and Georgia were in NATO today, we would be involved in a world war with Russia. Shouldn't someone speak up? Shouldn't we have some sort of national debate before we commit our sons and daughters to war in a faraway land? One thing is for certain, Russia will always care more about those lands than we will. Does that make Russian aggression right? Absolutely not. But our decision, the decision at hand, is are we willing to send our sons and daughters to fight in border disputes over Montenegro? Most Americans couldn't find Montenegro on the map. Are you willing to send your kids there to fight? That's what this is about. And this is sloughed over. You know, they're going to forbid amendments. You know, I forced this debate. Nobody wanted to have this debate. They want a rubber stamp, they want no debates, and they want to send your kids to war with no debate. Today they will pass this at my objection, but they will allow no amendments. When I finish this speech, I will ask for an amendment, and it will be denied because they do not want to debate whether your sons and daughters go to war. I find that appalling. I am ashamed of a Senate that will not have a debate and will not have a vote. From the very beginning, our republic was founded on a deep suspicion of entangling alliances. Our founders wanted to do everything possible to avoid the endless chronic wars in Europe. In Europe for centuries, kings from one nation fought their brothers and their cousins in other nations. This meaningless fratricide continued even into the 20th century. The founding fathers were emphatic in their desire to avoid endless war. Washington wrote that our true policy is to steer clear a permanent alliance with any portion of the foreign world. Jefferson echoed this when he famously wrote that peace, commerce, and honest friendship with all nations, entangling alliances with none. Even in modern times, such military heroes as President Eisenhower opposed intervention in Hungary, even when the naked aggression of the Soviets was appalling. Eisenhower likely may have had no real opportunity, though, because the Soviet Union had rolled in with 200,000 troops and 4,000 tanks. But at least part of the decision not to go into Hungary in the 50s was not for lack of sympathy for freedom, not for lack of sympathy for self-determination of a country, but it was the realpolitik decision of a nuclear confrontation with a nuclear Russia. Fast forward to today. For 16 years, we have been at war in the Middle East. 16 years. Our justified response, if I had been here, I would have voted for going after the people who attacked us on 9/11. Our justified response, though, has drug on and on. There are people fighting in the war who were not born on 9/11. The Congress voted after 9/11 to go to war. They voted to go after the people who planned and plotted the attacks on the Trade Center. That vote from 15 years ago is used to justify all war everywhere on the planet. There has been no meaningful debate on the wars we are currently involved in the Middle East. We currently fight illegally and unconstitutionally in the Middle East because your representatives are afraid to have a public debate. They will stifle debate at all costs, and they will, they will broker no amendments. They will allow no amendments to occur. Our unrestricted, unvoted upon involvement in war everywhere informs my opposition to expanding NATO. Everyone likes to talk about NATO's Article 5 obligation to come to the defense of any NATO ally is attacked. That is in the treaty. If Montenegro is attacked, we will have to respond. But my concern is that many in Congress believe that Article 5, saying that we have to defend Montenegro, that this farms out this power to declare war to an international body, and they don't think they have to vote again. You don't believe me? They haven't voted for 15 years for war, and we are still at war. We continue to go to new countries at war with no vote. You think that Montenegro won't be attacked and there won't be a war without a vote? This is their history. Their history is one of not obeying the Constitution.
I don't know about you Americans, but I believe Rand Paul. I think he's a much better politician than any John McCain. I think we need more Rand Pauls and term limits, as he believes John McCain is evidence of.
Well, I think he makes a really, really strong case
for term limits. I think maybe he's past his prime. I think maybe he's gotten a little bit unhinged.
Thank you, and God bless.